Hey friends, it's Simon Hurley and welcome to another video. I'm so excited to have you guys here. So my new release with Ranger and Spellbinders is out now, and I'll have links down below to the whole line and everything I use in today's video if you want to check anything out. But today I'm going to focus in on the coordinating die sets that Spellbinders created to work along with my stamp sets, and I'm going to show how to use them in several different out-of-the-box ways on today's cards. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm going to start off by showing kind of a unique way to use them with the stamping foam. So you could use the circle cut stamping foam, which has the inside circle or the outer frame, or you can use the heart cut stamping foam or really any of them, but I thought that this one would be great since Valentine's Day is coming up. So with these larger shape foam packs, you get 2 of these in each package, and each one has an insert and the frame. So this one has a heart right inside, and then it's got the heart frame as well, which is really awesome. And again, great for Valentine's Day or sort of love themed cards. I did want to mention that Scrapbook.com is having a great deal on the circle and heart cut stamping foams this week. So if you're watching it when it releases, I'll have links down below to that sale, but they're at a great price point anyways, so you guys can check them out. Okay, so I'm going to bring in the Butterfly Kisses stamp set, and I'm going to use these 2 butterfly outlines to do an impression in the stamping foam. All right, so I'll pull these guys right out of the set like this, and then we can kind of align them on top of the stamping foam how we want them to stamp. So I'm thinking like here and here is probably good, and then I'll leave a little bit of room right over here for a sentiment. And then to pick these guys up, I'll just go in with an acrylic block and pick them right up off of there, and then we're going to use this to make the impression. Alright, so I'm going to heat up the stamping foam for about 10 to 15 seconds. I like this Ranger heat tool since it has more of a wide mouth, so it evenly disperses the heat a little bit better, but any heat tool will work. And then once this is good and hot, I'm going to have my stamp ready at hand, so that once that's ready, we can go in and press that right into our stamping foam, giving it some good pressure to make sure that we're going to get a nice indent in here. And then hopefully, yep, there we go. It gives us a really great impression into our stamping foam. All right, I'm gonna do a really basic color combo that I tend to love. I'm gonna start off with a little bit of Game Over at the bottom here, which is this nice dark kind of maroon color. And whenever I'm doing my inking with my inks onto my stamping foam, really it goes for any type of ink, you're going to want to go in this sort of circular swiping motion, right? Because usually when you stamp, you do kind of like this tapping motion, but it doesn't get much ink on the surface, whereas this swiping kind of blends the ink nice, and it also gets a really great rich color and even coverage over top of the surface. Next, I'll use some Prom Queen, and you can kind of overlap them a little bit as well to make sure that they're going to blend together and give you great blends. You know what, I'm going to squeeze Guppy in here as well to kind of blend in between the pink. And this is going to lead really nicely into Shooting Star, which is the super bright yellow that we're going to throw right up at the top edge here. Once we have that good and inked, I'm going to bring in my misting water bottle, and I'm just going to spray this about 2 to 3 times. You want to spray it enough so that it sort of glistens and that water is going to help it transfer, but there's no big blotches of water, because if you have too much water, it's going to kind of blur the lines and details. I'll line it up onto the cardstock, and then we can stamp it down, giving it some good pressure so that all of the stamp transfers really nicely. All right, then when we lift this off, check out that really great image that we have. And this isn't looking like a lot right now because those butterflies are cut off, but I'm gonna show you how we're gonna kind of turn this into a finished project. For cleaning the stamping foam, I'm just gonna go in and spray this down with some water. And cleaning off the Simon Hurley Create inks are super easy. I'm just gonna go in and wipe them off. But if you're using ink that usually stains, it might stain your stamping foam. And that's totally okay. It's a tool and it'll still work if it's stained. And then to reset the stamping foam, I'm gonna go in with my heat tool again, and start heating this again for about 5 to 10 seconds. And you'll see that slowly as you heat it, that design is gonna disappear back into the stamping foam, and it's gonna go nice and flat. And then you're able to reuse this over and over again, which is so awesome. So then I can impress this into whatever design I want next, and it'll impress that design. But if you like the design that's in your stamping foam, you can totally keep it by just not reheating it again, and you can keep using that over and over again as well. So now I can bring in the Coordinating Butterfly Kisses die set, and I'll pull out the 2 butterflies that I want to use on today's card. And then all I'm gonna do is grab a little bit of mint tape. This is my favorite tape for die cutting because even when it runs through the die cutting machine, it doesn't rip your cardstock, which is super helpful. And I'm just going to go in and line it up with the frame of the butterfly that we have so far. So just making sure that on the edges that we have showing, it's got a nice even border there, and then we'll tape it down to hold it in place for die cutting. And then same thing with this butterfly. We don't have too much of this one showing, but anything that we do have showing, we can kind of line up with the die, making sure that it has a nice even border. And then we can place the tape down. So this is going to hold it in place while we run it through our die cutting machine. All right, I like to use the Platinum 6 because it's pretty nice and portable. So I just lift it right up to my desk. I'll place this right inside, and there's this new black edition from Spellbinders and Scrapper.com, which is super sleek. So that's what I've been using, but any die cutting machine will work. All right, and once those are done, we can easily pop them right out, and you'll see they've cut out really nice and beautifully. And again, that mint tape isn't gonna rip your cardstock at all. So to adhere this card together, I have an A2 size tap folding stark white card base. And I'm going to take a piece of this kind of pinkish cardstock. I thought it matched Prom Queen nicely, and this is just from Spellbinders. And we're just gonna add a little bit of tape, and then we'll adhere this right down to the card front. I just want this nice solid color down. You can kind of skip this step if you want to, but it's gonna add a pop of color underneath our panel. And then I'm gonna go in and adhere this one right down on top of it. And with all these little pieces, just make sure you kind of get into those details with your tape runner, or if you're using liquid adhesive, get in there and make sure that all of those little pieces are getting adhered down as well. And now here's where this colored cardstock comes into play, okay? Because we're gonna take our butterflies and we're gonna kind of bend them upwards like this, so that the wings will kind of lay upwards while the butterfly lays down flat on the card in the center. So I'm gonna apply a little bit of liquid adhesive just right into the center there. No more than that little bit there. And then I'm going to pop this right inside. It's like some inlaid die cutting, so it'll just fit right into that space there. But then the awesome part about this is when you look at an angle, you get that really beautiful pop of pink and that nice contrast. So you could have skipped that step if you want to, but I think that extra little added detail really adds a lot to the card. And again, same for this one. We'll kind of bend these wings upward a little bit, curl them a bit, and then I'll add just a little bit of liquid adhesive right to the center there. And then again, it'll fit right into place there, and then make sure it's nice and adhered down. All right, and then for the sentiment, I'm gonna use a sentiment that says, "I cherish our friendship," from that same Butterfly Kisses stamp set, and I've applied it to an acrylic block with my Simon Hurley grid lines on it, so that when I stamp this down, I can just line up the side of the card with the grid lines, and that's gonna ensure that that sentiment stamps down nice and straight. So I love the grid lines on these acrylic blocks. And there we go. I love how this one turned out with that heart cut stamping foam to create that really beautiful heart image with the butterfly stamps. And then using those coordinating dies to cut them out and to finish off the butterfly shape really worked nicely. And then of course, some sort of inlaid die cutting where we sort of popped the shapes out really made this card come to life and look like the butterflies are flying off of the card front. I absolutely love how this one turned out, and with Valentine's Day coming up, this would be a great card to send to your friend. All right, so for this next card, I'm going to bring in a couple of colors of Lunar paste, and I've also placed down a craft sheet because it's gonna get a little bit messier here. And I'm just going to take the Lunar paste on my craft sheet and just apply like super thin layers. Like we don't want a lot of this Lunar paste, just a little bit to kind of cover the surface with a bit of color. So I'm using some blues, greens, purples, and pinks here. These are going to be, again, for some more butterflies. So I thought this color blend would work great together. Next, I'm gonna bring in a little bit of Psych. I love this lime green color. And again, a little bit goes a long way. We don't want any like globs or super thick colors. So just kind of lay down a little bit here and there all over the craft sheet. Next, we'll bring in some Tropical Tango for that sort of emeraldy kind of color. Mix that in all throughout. And last but not least, I'm gonna bring in a little bit of gold, which is this beautiful gold rush color. I absolutely love how it looks. So I'm again just gonna grab a little bit on my palette knife and then mix it in here and there all over the background. Then I'm gonna bring in my water and again, spritz this down a little bit so that we get the colors to sort of move and be able to flow a little bit more. So it's gonna create them a little bit more liquidy. And then I'll bring in black or white cardstock. You could use either here, but I'm gonna use black cardstock and just start dipping it right in. Now you can see this is when I dip straight in, but if I dip it in and then I kind of smoosh it a little bit, then it's going to kind of pull that color a little bit and pick it up a bit better. So just kind of pull down and then smoosh a little bit, move it around, and it'll lift off some of that color beautifully. And this is looking like a little bit of a hot mess at first, but all we wanna do is just cover our background in the beautiful Lunar paste colors like this. So again, move it a little bit around and then lift it up and you get just this gorgeous background. Check out how that looks. And then if we want to, there's still a lot of this color left, so we can do several pieces of this cardstock. And like I said, a little bit goes a long way when it comes to Lunar paste. You can really cover several backgrounds just by using that little bit of paste there. So now the important part is drying these. You can let these air dry if you want to, but I'm impatient, so I'm going in with my Ranger heat tool. And don't worry, the lunar pastes are heat stable, so it won't affect it at all, and this is just going to sort of evaporate the water off of it and dry the lunar pastes pretty quickly. And you can really see as these dry, they're gaining their shine back and they're looking a lot prettier than they were when they were soaked with water. And check out just how bold and shiny they are once all of the water is gone off the surface and they're completely dry. So I like how this one looks. I'm gonna set it off to the side, but with this one I wanna add a little bit more color and shine to it. So I'm gonna go right back into the lunar paste background, and now that it's dry, we can start kind of building up our color a little bit more if we want to. So I'm gonna make this one just a little bit bolder, and I'm just going to keep dipping it back into the lunar paste until I'm happy with the colored results. All right, and I think that's pretty great. I think it's super cool, and you can even see there, since less water is on the surface, we're getting more texture from that lunar paste, and all that texture is gonna stay in the background and dry like that. So all we need to do is heat set this again, or let it dry by itself, and then we'll have a great background that's ready to die cut from. All right, and here is that background with even more layers, and you can see all of that amazing texture in there once it dries too. But I think the coolest part about both of these backgrounds is even though it has all of that amazing shimmer and shine on top, once this stuff is dry, it's not coming off on your fingers whatsoever, which is really amazing. Lots of the shiny products on the market kind of come off on your or the recipient's hands, and I don't like that. So once lunar paste is dry on your cardstock, it's gonna be permanent and stay in place, which is awesome. All right, I'm gonna use this background, and I made it a little bit bigger than card front size so that I can cut off some of the excess and really use the parts that I liked most about it. So I'm going to trim this down a little bit, and I'm gonna trim it down to 5 1/4 by 4 1/4 inches, and then I can use these little pieces on different cards to finish them off. All right, so I think on this one, I just want that one butterfly front and center. I'm gonna line it up kind of in the top center of the card, and then I'm gonna reuse that piece of mint tape that I used earlier and place it down to hold it in place while we run it through our die cutting machine. Then I'll just run that right through. Then I'm gonna use the scrap piece of cardstock to use this little butterfly and cut this guy out as well. So I'll choose an area that I like of the design, and then I'm going to run it right through to die cut it out. So then we have the little butterfly, and then out of this background, we have the larger butterfly that we cut out, and we then have this sort of frame with the butterfly cut out of it as well. And then I'll adhere this right down to the front of an A2 size top folding card base. And you can see, I love that background and that really nice window that shows that beautiful butterfly right in the center. It gives it tons of contrast. All right, then I love using the clear sheet to see what's going to fit inside of this butterfly best. There's lots of different options we got going here. I love the sentiment in this set, but I think I'm gonna use the "You Are Blossoming" sentiment. I wanna keep this super simple and make sure it's nice and straight too, so I'm going to bring this inside of my MISTI to make sure I stamp it perfectly. I'll line it up right in the center there. And then to make sure it's straight, I'm just going to use the little grid line on the front of the MISTI to make sure that it's nice and straight when we stamp it down. I'll ink this up with some nice black ink, and then we can stamp it right down onto our card. Now I thought I was done with this card just as it is with the sentiment on the front like this, but I thought I wanted to add a little bit more dimension and fun. So this is another great way to use your coordinating dies, all right? So I'm going to lay this die right in here. It fits in place because we've cut it out of that background already. And then once it's sort of locked in place there, I'm gonna tape down my mint tape to just hold it in place while we run it through our die cutting machine. And when we run this through, we wanna make sure it only cuts through the front layer of the card. So I'm just going to open my card base to make sure it just cuts through this side. We'll slide that right in our die cutting machine, and then I'll place my plates down and run it right through. And once that's done, it cuts out this beautiful window right in the front and center of this card, so it gives it a little bit more 3D and dimension. And then, since we have this little butterfly piece that I've already stamped down the sentiment on, I'm just going to add a little bit more adhesive down onto this butterfly, and then we can fold down our card and we can just inlay this right inside there. So that when it's closed like this, it just looks like it's right on the front of the card, and then when you open it up, it shows this beautiful butterfly on the inside with that sentiment. All right, so there is the real finished card. I love how this one turned out with that great window technique, which you can really only do with the coordinated dies. And then I kept the rest of the card super simple to really let that background shine that we created using all the different colors of lunar paste. It gives such great color and shine to the cardstock. I want to keep the background super simple for this card, so I'm going in using the Kaleidoscope Flowers background stamp. I love this one because you can peel apart certain sections and use them by themselves, but here I'm just going to use the full background by itself. So I'm using this light gray cardstock and the light gray woof ink so that it's going to give a really great tone-on-tone look. It'll give enough detail, but it won't take away from the rest of our card project. Once that's inked up, we can then place it right into our background stamp. And then to give it some good pressure, I'm just going in with the pressure tool and I'm going to move it all the way around the background stamp to make sure that everything transfers really nicely and helps to get a great impression. And then when I lift this off, check out that stamped image. I love that sort of tone-on-tone effect, and we get lots of beautiful detail with that floral background stamp. It has such a great geometric look to it, so you can use it for lots of different backgrounds like this. And then to finish this off, if you guys have seen my videos, you know I always love to go back in with the same color that I was using and sort of go around the edge to give it a little bit of depth and dimension. So in this instance, I'm going back in with that same wolf color that I did my stamping with, and I'm just going to lightly blend all the way around the edges. And by darkening up the edge, it's going to keep the center nice and light, so it's going to draw your eye into the center where the focal point will be. So I'll adhere that right down to our card base, and especially against the stark white cardstock, you can really see the great contrast that it adds. And then I'll add down the butterflies that we die cut out, and again with butterflies, I always love to just add a little bit of liquid glue into the center like this to pop down the center and adhere that down, but then it gives the wings the ability to move a little bit and lift off the card to make the butterflies look like they've got a little life to it. And I'll just have these kind of fluttering across the card, going at an angle like this, and again, it brings some life to those butterflies really nicely. For this one, I'm going to use a little bit of Versamark clear sticky ink, and I'm going to stamp it down onto my black cardstock, giving it some good pressure. Here I'm using the sentiment that says fluttering by to say hi, and then I'll throw over a layer of my white embossing powder, tap off any of the excess, and I also find lightly blowing on it helps to get rid of any of the excess embossing powder, and then we can go in and heat set until it's nice and bright white. And then I'm going to go in with my Fiskars Spring Assist scissors, and I'm just going to go quickly around this sentiment. And I find that rather than leaving it on a rectangle of cardstock, this cutting it out gives it a little bit more of a finished effect and shows off more of your card design. So I'll just pop the sentiment up on some foam tape in one of the gaps to finish everything off. I really love how beautiful these shiny butterflies are using those lunar paste backgrounds. And again, you don't have to use the stamps to use the die because you can totally recognize that these are beautiful butterflies. And then finishing it off with the nice detailed Kaleidoscope flowers background really brings in a nice finishing touch to the card. I want to make sure these scraps don't go to waste, so I'm going to bring in these strips of cardstock that we have. These are again the cutoffs of the lunar paste backgrounds, and then I'll take an A2 top folding stark white card base, and I'm just going to adhere these at a little bit of an angle onto the card. So then just adding a little bit of adhesive to the next one, and then again, following that same pattern, I'm going to leave a little bit of white space in between, and then add it at that same angle on the card. And then last but not least, this tiny little strip, we're going to add some adhesive, and then add it right on top. Then we can just quickly turn it over to the back side and trim off any of the excess that's hanging over top of the edge, and it'll clean up those edges really easily. And that creates a really great foundational background to finish off this card. Again, that shine is just so beautiful, and I didn't want it to go to waste. To finish off this card, I'm going to use this butterfly that's sort of resting, and we're going to rest it on those paper strips. And then I'm also going to grab out the solid pieces to help color this butterfly right in. All right, I'm going to ink this up using some VersaFine Clear Nocturne ink, which is going to give me a really great crisp jet black image. So we'll stamp that down, giving it some good pressure, and there we have our nice bold image. And this black ink is a pigment ink, so it takes a little bit longer to dry. So to help set it, I'm going to throw over a layer of clear heat embossing powder and heat set it till it's clear and shiny. Then to do this next part, I'm bringing in my Misty stamping tool to make sure that I get the stamping perfect. And I'm going to bring in the solid image that we can use to color this guy in. So I'm just going to place it on top. And with the Misty especially, you can really easily take a little bit more time to line it up and get it in position, and then pick it up with the Misty door. Since there's some purple in the cardstock that we created, I'm going to use some Tripleberry and Crown Me to do the shading. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of Tripleberry, and I'm just going to apply this ink down onto the butterfly there. And then we can turn over the lid and stamp it right down, giving it some good pressure. And you can see that ink transferred really nicely onto the butterfly. But then to add some shading, I'm going to go in with Crown Me, and I'm going to sort of roll this ink on. So I'm just using the edge of the ink pad at kind of an angle, and we'll roll this ink onto the surface so that it just applies some shading to the edge there. Then we'll stamp that right down over top, and it's going to apply some nice depth and dimension to the butterfly. And you can keep layering this up as many times as you want to. That's why I love doing it inside the Misty stamping tool, because if we want more of a dark color, we can just keep layering it up like that. Then to finish it off, I'm going to line up the most solid piece, and then I'm going to stamp this down using Shady, which is a really nice dark gray, almost black ink pad. So I'm going to just stamp that right down onto the surface there, and you can see it colors that in so simply. And this is why I love having those solid images, because it made it really easy to color in that butterfly and all the details effortlessly and get a great blend. All right, then I'll grab the coordinated die that matches this butterfly. I'm gonna line it up. And then again, with the coordinated dies, you just wanna make sure it's got an even white border all the way around when you line it up, and then it should be good to go. And we can place it down, and then we can run it right through our die cutting machine. Pop that image right out, and there we go. We got that image nicely cut out with that beautiful white border. So of course, this is the most basic way to use your coordinated dies alongside the stamp set. For the sentiment, I'm gonna use the Sending Well Wishes and Butterfly Kisses sentiment, and I wanna stamp it down in the center strip. So I'm gonna start off by using some anti-static powder tool to make sure that this isn't gonna stick where we don't want it to. Then I'll ink up the sentiment using a little bit of Versamark clear sticky ink, and then we can stamp it down. And here I want to play off the angle that it's at. So I'm gonna stamp it down straight at that angle as well, giving it some good pressure. And then I'll go in using that white embossing powder and I'll just throw it right over top to cover that sentiment and then tap off any of the excess. And again, I lightly blow on it too to make sure that any of the excess goes away. And then I'll heat set the sentiment till it's nice and bright white. And once it's heated, you can see it stands out really nicely, even against the shiny and bright cardstock that we created. To finish this off, I'll add the butterfly on some foam tape, and I'm just gonna make it look like he's sitting on one of the stripes of cardstock. And there we have the finished card. Again, another simple one, but I wanted to use up those beautiful strips of shiny cardstock that we created. And I also wanted to, of course, just share the most simple way to use your coordinated dies along with the stamp set to match right up with the image and get a beautiful cut. I absolutely love how this card turned out, and that butterfly is so beautiful. Now I also wanted to share how we can do some masking using the coordinated dies. So I'm gonna go in using the 4-inch roll of mint tape. I really like this because there's so much tape on here and it's also nice and thick, so it can work really great as a mask to cover your A2 size card. So I'm going to rip off a nice piece of this. Then I'll place the piece of tape on my die cutting plate here. And then I'm gonna bring back in the 2 butterflies that I've been using, and I'm just going to lay these right down on the surface in kind of the angle that I want them and the shape that I want them to be in. So I think that looks good. And then I'm going to place down my top die cutting plate and run this right through the die cutting machine. All right, so here's the awesome thing that this does. I'm gonna pull this right off my die cutting plate, and we have this nice piece of mint tape that has these butterflies cut out in this shape. So this is gonna act as a great stencil that we can stencil through and get these beautiful butterfly shapes. And then we get a double whammy out of this because these butterflies are going to act as masks, and we can kind of stencil around them, lay these down, stencil around them, and you get a nice white butterfly with a colored background. So starting off with this solid piece, I'm just gonna line it up with the edge of my cardstock to make sure it's on there straight, and then we can go right in and start adhering it down to the surface of our cardstock. All right, and just give this some good pressure to make sure that everything adheres nicely for when we do our ink blending. And it's just a little bit smaller than A2, so I'm gonna cut off the excess that's not covered. So to do my blending, I'm going to bring in my Simon Hurley Create ink pads, and I'm gonna do a blend from kind of green to blue to purple. All right, so when we go in with our blending tools, I'm just using the domed foam blending tool, and I'm just going to bring my color in, and I don't wanna go super dark with my color because I'm gonna do a second layer. So that's about good enough for me, and then I can move right into the next color. So next I'm gonna be using a little bit of Clear Skies. We'll go in with this light blue color, and then we'll blend from the bottom, moving upward and blending right into that sight color, which is that beautiful yellowish green, and it'll create a nice new color in between. I love how these inks blend so beautifully. Then I'm gonna bring in No Diving, which is this great mid-tone blue color. It's got nice saturation and vibrancy to it as well. So I'll just go right into the center here and blend this color in. And then last but not least, we're going to go into Crown Me, which is this really great bluish purple color. And again, it's this super bold and vibrant color that we're gonna add down at the bottom here. So blend that in, and there we go. And we can leave this just as it is right now, but I wanna darken it up and add a little bit of texture to the surface. So to add the texture, I'm gonna use the tiny diamond stencil, but in my collection, I also have tiny circles if you wanna add little polka dots or tiny hearts. So there's lots of different options here. And with this, I'm just going to take the stencil and a piece of mint tape, and I'm just going to attach the stencil on one side. So kind of creating a little bit of a hinge so we can lift this up and check on our progress as we're stenciling. Then I'm going to bring back in the colors that I was using. So starting off with Psych and that same blending tool, and I'm gonna go right back in and blend that color down. And this is why at the beginning, I was telling you to use a bit of a lighter hand, because as we build this color up, it will layer up and you'll see that layer since we're adding that color on a little bit more heavy-handed. Okay, so next I'm going to bring in Clear Skies, and we can again go in right over top on that color and blend that out. And then we'll start moving into those darker colors like No Diving and adding that right over top to get more depth and dimension. And last but not least, we'll finish it off with a bit of Crown Me right at the bottom there. Okay, so once we're done with that, you can see we've added tons of texture by going through that stencil and applying more ink down over top of the surface. And if you want to, if you think it's a little bit too much of a stark contrast between the diamonds and the colors, you can always go back in with a bit more ink to soften out that pattern and make everything a little bit darker if you want to. So then once we're done with this, we can go in and lift off our mint tape, and you can just see that beautiful outline that it gives us. It's super nice and crisp. And the awesome part about this mint tape too, is it's not going to rip your cardstock. It's the perfect amount of tack that I found that it sticks nicely, it doesn't move on the surface, but it doesn't rip anything, which is a game changer. All right, I love how this butterfly panel is turning out, and I want to create a piece of cardstock that's going to coordinate with the ink colors that we used. All right, so for this, I'm going to go in with Psych. I really love this bright color, and I'm going to use it as kind of a background panel. So I'm just going to ink blend a little bit of Psych all around the edge of the surface here, and I'm only going to cover the edge. This is a really great way to save on some ink and save on colored cardstock by just dyeing the edge of your cardstock whatever color you need it to be, and then it'll match your project perfectly and you're not wasting any supplies. Add a bit of adhesive down, and then we can add it right down to that colored cardstock that we just created. And by adding that down, we get that really great colored border, and nobody would know that the inside of this cardstock is just white and that we dyed the edge. All right, I stamped down the Hello Beautiful sentiment, and that finishes off the card just perfectly. I love using that mint masking tape to get the inside of those butterflies blended just beautifully like that, and then layering up different stencils in your collection to create even more texture in your blended backgrounds. It's super simple, but I love the bold color inside of those beautiful butterflies. All right, now to finish things off, I'm gonna do the exact opposite. So I'm going to bring in these butterfly masks, and I'm going to just lay them right down on the surface of the cardstock, again at this sort of angled design that we've been doing to make the butterflies look like they're kind of flying. Going to place them down, and then when we do this technique, we want to make sure that we kind of burnish them into the cardstock like this, make sure they're adhered nice and well so they're not going to lift up during our blending process. You can even sort of use the back of your bone folder to really make sure these are adhered nicely down to your cardstock, and you'll see why we're doing this in just a second. I'm going to go in with one of my favorite warmer blends to color this cardstock, starting off with a bit of Shooting Star, and I'm going to start off at the top of the cardstock. And again, I'm using these domed foam blending foams and my stark white cardstock, and the mix of these three products, the blending foams, the cardstock, and the inks, it really makes blending super easily, and you get such a smooth blend in between colors. So I'm gonna go into Guppy here and blend this out, and like just effortlessly, you can seamlessly blend in between these colors and get a really easy blend. All right, moving down into Bee Sting, which is this nice bright red color. I'm gonna go in and blend this in between with Guppy, and again, you can see that blend is so nice. And it really is just so simple to not get harsh marks and get such a smooth effect with the inks. And then moving down into a little bit of Game Over, which is this nice darker maroon color. I'm gonna flip this so I got a great place to hold on to, and then blend right into that color, that super rich color. And with this, you can see that the masks are not lifting up at all. It was really helpful to burnish those down into the cardstock surface to make sure they didn't lift while we were doing our blending. And then to finish it off, I'm bringing in a little bit of Crown Me right at the bottom to kind of darken that up and blend right in between that nice maroon color, and you get, again, a beautiful color blend in between there. All right, so you can see this beautiful blend, and you could totally leave it here. But with the last card, we added color on top to make it darker. And with this card, we're going to remove color to give kind of a lighter design and add some texture. So for this, I'm going in with the Flowering Mandala Peel Apart background stamp. This has so much beautiful detail in the mandala, and I think it goes really well with the butterfly design. And this sort of inside little hexagon peels apart if you want to use that separately and create your own designs. But in this instance, I'm just gonna go in with a little bit of water, and I'm just going to lightly mist it over top of the surface here. And then once that's got an even coating of water on the surface, I'm gonna go in and stamp down my mandala, and I'm gonna kind of let it hang off the side of the cardstock. Just give it some light pressure to make sure that every part touches the ink there. And then when we lift this off, you'll see it's gonna start reacting with the ink on the surface there. Because my inks react with water, it's gonna react and kind of lift up the ink. I'm gonna spray it down again. I'm gonna bring it in on another side of the cardstock there. Again, make sure that every piece kind of touches and reacts with the ink nicely. then lift it off, and we'll do it one more time. I'm gonna spray this down, and we'll use the opposite edge to stamp it right down and lift off some more of that ink. And this is what I love about this background stamp, is you're sort of able to use different portions of it hanging off the card to create a design like that. So I'm gonna help this dry by going with my heat tool, and you'll see that as it dries, it's going to keep reacting with that ink and lift it off to give even more of sort of a bleached effect, and it makes the ink lighter as it dries. And this will naturally air dry like this as well, but I find the heat tool helps to kind of speed along the process if you're a little bit impatient like me. And you can see that design is really coming out and showing so beautifully on the surface. You can see that design really came out and showed up even more. I love how the inks react with water so beautifully like that to lift off the color. And then to remove these masks, I'm just going in with a little tweezers to kind of help lift them off of the surface here. And again, you can see the really awesome part about this mint tape is that it removes from the surface easily without ripping it. You still want to be careful as you're pulling it off, but I found that with the mint tape, you have a lot less of a risk of ripping your cardstock than many of the other tapes on the market. But the really awesome part about that is it sealed it really nicely. So you can see, even with all the water we added down there, it didn't bleed under the mask, and it still has a super nice and crisp line. And then I stamped down the "I cherish our friendship" sentiment right in the middle of that butterfly, and that finishes off the card super simply. I love, again, using them as masks and creating this super colorful and bold background with all of that texture that we lifted off using the flowering mandala stamp and a little bit of water. That technique creates such a beautiful background, and I love how this card turned out. Alright you guys, so that's it for today's video. Tons of techniques using those coordinated dies, which I hope you guys found inspiring and really helpful. If you enjoyed the video, give it a big thumbs up, and leave me a comment down below letting me know which card was your favorite. I would love to chat with you guys down there. And remember, linked down below is a full supplies list to all the supplies I use too, and using those links helps support me, so I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all soon for another card making and crafting video. Have a great day. Bye!